takes over. States stands as the bailiff makes his way out. The reason he's doing that is because, of course, the care inquiry covers the periods when he worked in the Law Officers Department. Crown Officer now, of course. So
right, before we adjourned last evening, I saw Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be back home, despite the hospitality of the Constable of St Helier. So I'm sad to be here in another context, to be here at all, to have to debate this. I thought we put this to bed in the last session. The reason I came into politics was because I wanted initially, the initial reason I came into politics was to seek justice for abuse survivors, to make sure that we had a committee of inquiry, that we could learn from the mistakes that had been made, and all the reasons that we've heard yesterday. Yet we're back here again to reopen old wounds, and one has to ask why. This could have been quite a simple debate that was brought back to the Assembly, additional funding requested, and lots of the arguments that have been made, which I will look at, actually don't relate to the Committee of Inquiry. They're peripheral issues which are to do with other, perhaps, malaises in our system that need to be addressed at some point. So it is with a heavy heart that I'm here to have to fight again for something which I thought was secured for the survivors of abuse, but also for ourselves, and we're not covering ourselves in glory. This isn't about money today. This is about whether we continue to have a committee of inquiry, which has already started, or whether we stop that in the full view of the watching interested parties in our island, but also across the water in the UK and throughout the world. We have a choice at the end of today to vote one way or the other. We can actually be, I think, in this sense, a model democracy. We can show that we're mature, that we've made a conscious deliberation to make the right decision and to actually show the UK, who are suffering with similar problems at the moment, how we can do it in our own jurisdiction. Or we can simply say that we are no longer capable of governing ourselves and that we need foreign intervention, because that's what a no vote will be tantamount to. We will be saying to the UK, we can no longer govern ourselves, we can no longer ensure that justice is achieved and seen to be done in our island. Oh, and incidentally, we're in financial dire straits. Is that the kind of message we want to be putting out to the UK at this time as they come up to their general election? Oh, by the way, Jersey's in financial dire straits. They can't even afford to cough up £14 million, which is peanuts for them, because we're told that they've got savings in the bank whilst we've got billions in debt. Very interesting constitutional questions will be raised about the relationship of Jersey and also the culture that exists here, and it won't be long before a royal commission or the like is called for. And that's not to say the UK don't have their problems. So let's look at the UK, because I think sometimes it's interesting to take a step back. What I'm interested in the UK, and I think what we're all fascinated and perhaps disgusted by in that strange tension way, is the abuse that's happened over there over decades. Jimmy Savile has become synonymous with child abuse and predatory action in the UK. And of course the questions are, you know, what happened? What did he do? But the real underlying question is not so much why did he do it and what did he do, but is how was it allowed to be done for such a long time, and how was he able to get away with that for such a long period of time? We know partly what the answer is, and that must be to do with power, secrecy and fear, because you cannot do these things alone. Somebody as high profile and as powerful as Jimmy Savile, and he wasn't the only one, but he's the most high profile, couldn't have done what he did without other people knowing, without other people either being complicit, turning a blind eye, people in the media not reporting a story for fear of reprisals, people not reporting things either because the mechanisms for whistleblowers were not in place or because they feared for their own jobs. And how many times have we heard now, he was just too powerful, I tried to say something at the time, people told me, oh, don't be so silly, don't you know who he is? That exists in the UK, and this isn't something that's unique to the UK, and it's not something that's unique to Jersey. This is to do with the culture of abuse and to do with the machinations of power, secrecy and fear. And the only way to deal with that is actually to shine a bright light in there by somebody who's independent and impartial, and to come in from the outside, which is what we've done. That's what I thought this was already done and dusted. And so we want to know what happened in Jersey. We want to know how these things were allowed to happen. And we would like you to make recommendations so that we can put in place a system with your assistance in future so that these things, to the best of possibility, can never happen again. That's certainly what I would like to see. Now, moving back home to Jersey, let's take another local example, which is perhaps more comprehensible. The Beast of Jersey. Some members in the Assembly will be old enough to remember and be around at that time. They may have been young children at the time. They may have been slightly older. And they would have known the fear that prevailed in the island. My father was around at the time. And we had this remarkable situation. How was the Beast of Jersey allowed to get away with it for such a long time? Thankfully, he got caught in the end. But that was largely by chance, wasn't it? So the reason that he was allowed to get caught, despite the best intentions of the police, the work that went on, is because the only man in Jersey who didn't have his fingerprints taken, and I've said this before, was the Beast of Jersey. It's quite remarkable. The only individual man, all other men of a certain age were told that they had to go to the police station, give their fingerprints in, my father included, get the ink on the hand in those days. We've got you on record. The only individual who didn't have to do that was the Beast of Jersey. And why didn't he have to do it? Because he was friends with somebody in the honorary police force. That doesn't mean that the whole of the honorary police force is corrupt. It doesn't mean that the system in itself is wrong, but it does mean that we have a system which allows these things to happen. And as far as I can see, nothing's changed. And this is where the fear comes into it, because I don't think this is simply about money. I think people are genuinely concerned about what are the consequences if we have to change our system. And the point is, change will come sooner or later. It won't come from the likes of myself or the usual radicals from the 1700s who have been going on about the need for change and these change in our institutions. Deputy Labby touched on it yesterday about it boils down to culture. It's all about culture. And ironically, sir, we had the bailiff yesterday and today has recused himself because he realises that in a system where you've got a dual role or three roles in a lot of cases, perception is important. He also realises, no doubt, that he was in his past life an Attorney General, and we're coming up to the point of the Committee of Inquiry, which is going to look at the prosecution cases. I think it's term of reference 12 or 13 offhand, which we agreed, which I lodged, to make sure that we can look at whether the processes were fair and impartial and taken in a professional way without any political or other undue interference. That's the critical part. A lot of people have said this abuse inquiry is about giving a voice to the victims, and that is certainly true to a part, but it's by no means the most important part of the inquiry, in my opinion. I say that not to detract from the experiences that they've had and also the cathartic process that they're going through, but it has to be said that they can and already have had recourse to therapy where they need it. We need to carry on supporting them in that now and in the future. But the key thing is, and they can also, you know, they're free to talk of their experiences anyway, that's not the problem. We need to learn what went wrong. Those of us in society who have not been abused but who actually have an interest in decent and good governance in Jersey need to have the answers. It looks very bizarre to be stopping an inquiry just at the point at which those areas are going to be looked into. There is an elephant in the room as well, because if one is party to abuse, either directly because one has been an abuser in the past, or because one has been implicated, has covered up, etc. And we know that there will be people in our society who are in that position, who may actually be in positions of authority, who may be in positions of care at the moment, and we've heard that certainly alleged in the abuse evidence that's been coming forward so far. They don't want this inquiry to carry on. That's a given. Anything that they can do to shut this down, they will be doing it. And any influence that they can have in this Assembly, any ear that they might have of Assembly members to try and shut this inquiry down, they will be pulling those strings. We can be absolutely sure of that. They don't want their day to be able to give evidence, those abusers. Similarly, there will be those who need to actually clear their names, who feel that they have had allegations made against them falsely. We know that the former head of the education service over here has had very serious allegations made against him. I, for one, want to hear what he's got to say in response. He's been actually the head of one of the departments which is in charge of safeguarding in the island for the last X amount of years, and we need to know what he's got to say, if there are any lessons that can be learned, whether he's got anything to answer or not. We certainly need to hear that as a government. It would be completely ludicrous to stop this inquiry at this point, ostensibly on cost grounds. Has anybody seen the film Hot Fuzz? It was released in 2007. Edgar Wright directed it, co-written with Simon Pegg. It's about a small village in the UK. Very proud village, very pristine. It's got beautiful scenery. And then suddenly one of the police officers comes back from London with newfangled ideas, and all sorts of things start going wrong in the area. And essentially it's a story about a very small village which is very protective about its way of life. We've got a certain way of doing things here. And paradoxically, they end up tearing themselves apart because they don't like change. They don't like people coming in from outside, changing things, and they're trying to keep their way of life intact so much that they actually tear their beautiful small little village apart. I often see it as a good metaphor for Jersey in some cases, and other people have corroborated that theory. The bailiff, I'm told, talked about the Jersey Way and talked about the fact that we must claim back the Jersey Way and give it some kind of positive meaning, because certainly at the moment it doesn't. But everything that not everything, certain things that I've heard yesterday from senior ministers who frankly should know better, actually hark going back to the old Jersey Way. Sark has the Barclay brothers, sir. Jersey has the Balash brothers. Stop me if I say anything which is factually incorrect. In Sark, the Barclay brothers are deeply unpopular, and in my opinion, sir...
it also has the Farnham brothers. Myself and my two brothers live here, as do many other families with brothers.
So is this a point of order, sir? Is this a point of order?
No, carry on, please, Deputy.
I can only presume that the Senator is doing somebody else's bidding. I'll be watching how he votes at the end. Sark has the Barclay brothers, Jersey has the Balash brothers. The Barclay brothers, I believe, have done no favours to the island of Sark. I think they've brought disrepute onto the island of Sark, and it only goes to show what's happening there. They're tearing the island apart, sir. So let's get back to the point in hand. Yesterday we heard some spurious and some specious arguments. We were told, one, reasons we couldn't do this, money needs to be spent elsewhere. We know quite frankly that 40 million won't be spent anywhere else. We've heard very good intentions. This money could be spent on the victims of abuse. Senator Balash yesterday told us that the victims had been already compensated quite generously. I take exception to that. They haven't been compensated generously at all. If we look at the actual funding, you can work out the average given to each survivor is in the region of £19,000. Of course, some would have received much less than that. Some would have received more than that. £19,000 for a ruined life from childhood because somebody did not take care of you, and that when you were put in the confidence of the state, your life was ruined, often psychologically, all sorts of problems, and those are the ones who survived, the ones who died before their 40th birthdays through suicide, drink, drugs, etc., because they couldn't cope with the system and they were maladjusted. They got nothing. They essentially got a pauper's grave. So don't tell me that £19,000 on average per victim is generous compensation. Those are frankly sick words from an individual who should know better. The second point is, and incidentally, I didn't hear anybody really, apart from the usual suspects, when talking about the compensation, questioning it before. We know that the lawyers in the scheme have got the lion's share of the money that was allocated. It would have been, in hindsight, much easier to have a very simple triage system and just say, were you abused? Some basic checks, there you go, everybody £40,000. It would be much cheaper in the long run to do that. Even if it might have been objectionable for some individuals. We can't afford it. So we're being told by some ministers that we're actually in the position where Jersey's on the verge of bankruptcy. Let that sink in, let that message go out to the rest of the world. Jersey is now on the point of bankruptcy, that we can't afford to do this. We can afford other capital projects, presumably, such as the incinerator, which I don't think we needed. There are other projects which we'll argue the toss about, which will be massive capital projects. We also know that actually our criminal confiscation fund has been used as little more than a slush fund for looking for money and diverting it through there. We can seem to fund anything now from the criminal compensations fund, but it's questionable as to whether we can take money for this purpose, which would seem the most appropriate from that fund. But also the point is there's nothing left in the fund anyway. It's only a couple of million, and I think that's probably been earmarked already. We've been told that if we take money from the strategic reserve, it will threaten the island's stability. Is that the best we can do? Is it really come to that? We're going to threaten the island's stability. I suggest it's actually the opposite. If we don't do this today, then we're threatening the island's reputation and stability. We've heard that we don't like lawyers all of a sudden. But we've got some very eminent lawyers in the Assembly, sir. Someone else has said, if there's a problem with lawyers, if you don't like lawyers, if you think they're getting paid too much, then simply there is an access to justice review going on, which is chaired by the Assistant Minister or the Chief Minister's Department, Senator Rugia. I'm on it. Make submissions to that. Come up with some ideas about how we can improve access to justice in Jersey. Talk about the culture change that needs to take place in Jersey. You know, do we need to open up our very closed shop of advocates? Do we need to find a way, a legal aid system that works? Do we need to actually get the industry to contribute to their own fund for legal aid, etc.? Or do we just need a communist system? Is that the problem? A member saying that the free market doesn't work and that lawyers are getting paid too much, and like footballers, it should be nurses who are getting paid more, teachers who are getting paid more, and that lawyers should do everything out of the kindness of their hearts. Because that's a really interesting and philosophical debate to have, but it doesn't help us now, because that's not the situation we're in. We live in a real world where legal fees are high, and where the state's departments, who are also building up and racking up legal fees, as was alluded to by the Constable of St John yesterday, are also paying high fees for their costs. And the other argument we heard is that it won't achieve anything. Oh, this won't achieve anything. We've heard it would just go on. Well, that's really down to us. Certainly if we don't have the committee of inquiry, if we stop it now, then it won't achieve anything. We know that. That's a given. It's been said that the terms of reference are very broad, too broad perhaps. I think there's a reason for that. The terms of reference are very wide and cover a long period of time. Why is that? It's because the child abuse was very wide and it covered a very long period of time. That's why. It's because it wasn't picked up in 1965. No States member came to the States and blew a whistle and said, actually, there's a problem with Ola Garin. People are being abused there. The police are not picking up on it. We can't get any prosecutions. We need to look into this. It's taken quite 70 or so years, not to mention anything that may have gone on before that period. So, of course, the terms of reference are wide. And that may be problematic, and that's why it's expensive. But we can't get away from the fact that there are real consequences. If you want to have a committee of inquiry, sir, then you have to pay for a committee of inquiry. We can't employ window cleaners to do the committee of inquiry for us. We have to employ lawyers to do that. And that's no disparagement to window cleaners, because often their contribution to transparency is a lot more tangible. The real consequences are that if we don't go ahead with this, we've started a piece of work, but we won't be finishing it. Those who have had allegations made won't be able to give their input. There will be consequences nationally. We've heard about the headlines, I don't need to repeat that, but I will emphasise the fact that the UK are in the throes of a general election, and quite frankly, we know, like war, during a political campaign, truth is one of the first victims. They won't necessarily care about the nuances or the exactitudes of what goes on in our island. They will report it as they see it, and no doubt we'll have to deal with the consequences. And while Senator Balash might say we should be prepared to stand up to the UK newspapers and deal with their false headlines, etc., well, in many cases, let's be honest, it's their true headlines. If they say Jersey's just voted to cover up and end a child abuse inquiry just as it was getting to the juicy bits, we're banged to rights on that one. That is exactly what we will have done anyway. Then we need to deal with the consequences of that. Much better actually to not do that and to do the right thing in the first place. The last point, not the last point, Jersey is a place which is run by the rich and powerful in the interests of the rich and the powerful. In that sense, Jersey is no different to most places in the West, but it's much more pronounced and obvious because we market ourselves as that way. We've also got very strange institutions, and essentially what we need, and this is what I was talking about change before, change can either happen two ways, we're told, by evolution or by revolution. Or perhaps another way to look at it in the Jersey context is that change can either be imposed on us or it can be done with our initiation, and we can initiate our own change. We've not been very good at that historically. Quite frankly, so the only words that come to mind are unparliamentary, so I won't use them. We don't have a glowing track record when it comes to reforming ourselves. Certainly, from a reformer's point of view, if we wanted to instigate change in Jersey, if we wanted a proper independent prosecution service, which I think has to be one of the inevitabilities of the outcome of this, whether or not the inquiry continues, it will be imposed upon us. The UK will have to step in and say, look guys, you can't be doing this anymore. You're a semi-feudal backwater. You're starting to embarrass us, quite frankly. We're dealing with our own committee of inquiry in the UK. We can't have you and your mafia types, their words, not mine, in Jersey, embarrassing us further. We're just going to impose home rule for a period of time, and then we're going to sort you out with a system that fundamentally works for you. For too long, we have had institutions which have been unaccountable. This has necessarily led to arrogance, and it has facilitated cover-up. Because when we know the adage, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there is a risk when there are multi-roles that are combined into one, where there isn't accountability, when things are done behind the scenes, when somebody doesn't have to give the reasons for their deliberations and their decisions. Inevitably, mistakes get made. And if you put the reputation or the supposed reputation of an idea of the island, which is perhaps fantasy, before the reality of what's going on the ground, then this is where the problems arise. So let's look at the terms of reference which the Committee of Inquiry is just about to get to, because this is the really interesting part. They've completed phase 1 and they're going to move on to phase 2, which will take in term of reference 13 to establish the process by which files were submitted to the States of Jersey Police and the prosecuting authorities for consideration, and establish whether those responsible for deciding on which cases to prosecute took a professional approach, and whether the process was free from political or other interference at any level. Who are they going to need to call in to look at this? Well, in order to look at the prosecution, they need to talk to those who were doing the prosecutions at the time. They will need to talk to former law officers. They'll need to talk to former attorney generals. They may need to talk to former bailiffs and former deputy bailiffs as part of their inquiries. And so and Senator Balash acknowledged this yesterday. I think he was acknowledging the fact that that's an issue. But that's okay, because he gave us an assurance in this assembly that he had always acted in a professional manner. So that's okay. I could probably end my speech now and just sit down. Senator Balash has given us his word that he's always acted in a professional manner, and that's okay. The Jersey way continues. We don't need to verify that. Senator Cameron's shaking her head, which is strange, because I don't take things on face value. And I think that even if somebody has done a good job, and we'll look at that in a moment, won't we? even if they have done a good job, things are still open to interpretation, and other individuals may have a different opinion, and processes may need to change anyway. We voted yesterday that the Committee of Inquiry should look at documents that are already in existence, look at reports that have already been commissioned, and use those without having to necessarily reopen up lines of investigation which may be costly. And that's fine, that's been passed now. One such report that was made available and is in the public domain was to do with the police officer, honorary police officer Roger Holland. And this is in the public domain. It's worth that everyone should read it, because it actually tells us some of the systemic problems that you have when you have very powerful individuals left to make decisions on their own, or, to all intents and purposes, which are completely unaccountable. And this can be found quite easily. I've used the link, Tony Musing's blog, and you just type in Roger Holland and it will come up with a blog which is from the 4th of October 2011, sir, which is entitled Philip Balash and the Roger Holland Affair. In that, it quite clearly states that there were massive mistakes that were made, and this was in the 90s, sir. It was at a time when the Senator was an Attorney General. It was a time when it became apparent by another member of the Deputy give way.
Will the Deputy give way?
If it's a point of order, sir, I'll give way. If it's not, I won't.
Could you both sit down, please? I understand that this is an important debate. It is an emotive debate, and feelings are running very high. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we maintain a high standard of debate and follow standing orders as best we can. Now, I've been as flexible as I possibly can, but could I remind all members, not just the current speaker, that during a speech, a member of the States must not use offensive or insulting language about any member of the States, or impute improper motives directly or by innuendo to any member of the States. And I would remind members of that part of Standing Order 104 before we continue. Senator Balash, did you want to make a point of order?
No, I didn't want to make a point of order. I wanted to ask the Deputy if he would give way, but he's apparently said no.
Is that the case, Deputy?
Thank you, sir. I accept that ruling. One presumably is allowed to read from a document which is in the public domain and which deals with something which is very germane to this issue of child protection. And it also, sir, deals with the fact that yesterday the Senator told us that he didn't, essentially what he was saying is we didn't need the Committee of Inquiry to go on to Part 13 because as far as he's concerned, he's always acted in a professional way. I have evidence which suggests that the Committee of Inquiry might still need to do that because that is moot, sir.
Deputy, sit down, please. I must ask you not to impute improper motives directly or by innuendo to any member of the States. That is a standing order, and I would ask you to stand by it. We require this is an important and emotive debate, and we must maintain the highest of standards. Can you please continue with your speech?
So, and I'm not intending to do anything other than that. And I think this is part of the issue that we have, because in the real world, sir, none of us is perfect, but it seems that when we become a states member, we're all perfect. And so one can't even refer to real events that have happened and real reports, it would seem. And so I've got no intention of impugning, or is that the word, sir? Or implying improper motives?
Thank you. Have you finished your speech?
Chance would be a fine thing, sir. So if I can provide a summary of the report, which, as I've said, is in the public domain, and it's interesting how difficult it is, notwithstanding parliamentary privilege, that we're in a forum where the truth is supposed to be able to come out, people are supposed to be able to speak forth in a way which is unencumbered from fear, sir, and it is quite difficult sometimes to do that, especially when one's train is interrupted. The point is, there is a document in the public domain which says that during the time when Senator Balash was Attorney General, he made decisions which allowed a known sex offender to remain in the honorary service. And rather than remove him, which was within his power to do, he decided to leave that individual in power because it would have been too difficult and complex to do that, to remove him, and also because the event of having been sworn in was a solemn affair. That's written there, so that's not meant to be impugning in any way. That's just simply fact, and members can read that document themselves. And I don't make any apology for saying that. And in fact, I wouldn't have even had to bring this up were it not for the fact that the senator himself has mounted such a robust attack on this proposition to try and get his allies around him. Because let's face it, the only people who are going to vote against this proposition today are the hardcore Senator Balash supporters, who we know who they are. We've seen the cracks in the Council of Ministers, and I do very much feel for the Chief Minister, because I know that the Chief Minister, despite our political differences, economic differences, to do with conservative and perhaps socialist policies, we differ, and on most sides of the debate we will be not aligned. But in this debate it transcends the political divide, because we know that this is about fairness, it's about openness, and it's about secrecy, and it's actually about tackling the malaise and something which is rotten at the heart of Jersey society. The institutions which have been there for too long, which may have worked during a certain period of time, but are actually no longer fit for purpose in the modern, complex and cosmopolitan Jersey that exists. Does that mean that we throw the baby out with the bathwater? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But it means that if we're not mature enough to be able to do this ourselves and decide what changes need to be done, then this will be done for us, sir. I'm looking at members. Members don't like this speech for some reason. I don't know why they don't like this speech. It's not comfortable. I haven't come here today relishing giving this speech. It was a speech that was necessary. I thought the Committee of Inquiry, as I said earlier, was done and dusted. I want these individuals to be getting on and doing their job. But it seems if we're going to keep on reopening the wound, and it was the Senator himself when he stood for election the first time saying, the states just waste so much time, they keep on debating things that they've already decided to do. And a lot of people say, yeah, that's right. I mean, but now we're seeing that actually, in some cases, he's the culprit himself for bringing these things back to the Assembly, completely within his right to do that, sir. But it has consequences. It has consequences for the individuals sitting up there. It has consequences for us and the time that we take to debate this. And what happens if we switch it off now, apart from the obvious consequences, is that we don't learn the lessons, and that in another 20, 30 years' time we find that there's been some other massive problem. It may not be child abuse, it may be something else which is quite severe, and we realise that there's a systemic problem. There are consequences in 30, 40 years' time, and somebody else has to come back to the Assembly, institute another committee of inquiry at great cost, and there'll be a big contentious debate around that. This debate didn't need to be contentious. It could have quite simply been brought by the Chief Minister. There could have been talks that happened previously, and we could have said, yeah, we don't particularly like spending money, we accept that this needs to be done. So we can't draw a line in the sand on this issue until we've actually allowed the Commission to do what they need to do, sir. I think it's apparent that I've made all my points. I don't think there's anything new. Invariably there might be things that I think that I've missed, and I can kick myself afterwards, although I'm sure there are lots of other members who'll be queuing up to do that for me, sir. So it's not about money, it's actually about doing the right thing. Jersey's not a poor place. It's true that the wealth isn't shared equally in our island, but if we can't afford a relatively cheap committee of inquiry in the grand scheme of things, if we look at our overall spending, then I do fear for us as an island, not economically, but actually morally.